What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by Eisner Award-winning creator Darcy Van Poelgeest. I said Geest. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, Poelgeest is correct.
Oh,
Poelgeest.
I did say it right.
Yeah,
I said it right, and I had it in my head wrong, and so
you're better than you thought.
that's the way it goes. I should have just gone with him. Like, Darcy was being so cool, didn't even correct me, and you didn't because I said it correctly the first time. But welcome to the show, Darcy.
Thanks, man. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So again, like I said, I got first exposed to your work with Little Bird, and I think that's where the world got exposed to your work. And I want to talk about Little Bird. I want to talk about Lotus Land, your new book with Boom Studios here a little bit. But before we do, I always like to know: have you always had a love for like reading comics as a person, as a kid? Like, did you have that growing up, or is this something kind of newer for you?
No, it's definitely not new. It's super old, as am I. But yeah, no, I've read comics since I was 10 years old, and always been a huge fan. And yeah, just fell in love. I was thinking about it. I've thought about this before, and although I don't think I've ever shared this before, but I think probably what happened, because my love of comics is like intense. Like I always just like it's always occupied like an important part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been more than just like, oh yeah, I like to read comics sometimes. It's always been like a big part of my life, I guess. So except like when I was maybe in my early 20s, I sort of fell out for a bit and then came back to it. But I think what happened was I moved from where I was born to where I kind of grew up around. I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I think it was difficult for me to make friends, and that's like that coincided with me discovering comics. And so I had a void in my life, and it just filled the entire thing. And so I just would spend like, and don't nobody feel sorry for me. Like I would spend like days in my room just reading comics, and I fucking loved it. Like I was like, who needs friends? Like, this is the best.
Listen, this is I have a podcast where we talk about comics. No one's going to judge you for being locked in a room for 3 days reading comics.
Yeah,
you're one of us.
Always, and I just filled my whole wall above my bed with like all the comics. I pinned them up all on the wall, and I just loved it, man. It was just so such a wild it still is such a wild medium. It's something you can't get from movies, and it's something you can't quite get from books, and it's just such a beautiful thing. I love it.
It really is. Like, no, I feel like your origin story is a lot like a lot of ours. Our friends were comic books, and that's okay.
Yeah. I did eventually make friends, and they were great too. But I think it's like when it strikes when, if you discover it at a particular time in your life, it becomes more than just, something I like,
Yeah.
And I think it was one of those things. So,
and it becomes an obsession, and you have comic books behind your walls and behind you.
Yeah. I mean, if I point the camera that way, it's like this giant shelf of short boxes.
It's so where then at what point did you go from being a huge fan of comics consuming your life, being involved, part of your life, to saying, this is something like I want to do. I think I can do this, and I want to do this.
Never occurred to me that I can recall. I'm also dyslexic, and I have a lot of learning disabilities, and so I gravitated towards like visual things, and wanted to pursue being a filmmaker, which I did, and accomplished that, which was amazing, and made sort of started off just making like experimental art films, I guess you could say. that evolved into more like narrative, because I love to write. So sort of more a narrative type thing. And then those sort of got me in the door of like the commercial world, like an executive producer saw one of my things, was like, gave me a shot at something, and I didn't totally screw it up. So that kept building. And the next thing I knew, I was in that business for like 15 years. And to be frank, I was just like tired of it, like it was just not, it was not fulfilling my sort of creative needs, and I wasn't getting any younger. And so I started, long-winded way of saying, then I started like working on a story. First, I wrote it as like a short script to be like another short film, because I had two very successful short films kind of back to back. And I was like, oh, this is not that. I'm like, fuck, maybe I could write this as a comic, and that was the first time it ever dawned on me. And so I spent a year just writing that, and then found an artist, and it took us 6 years to complete it. And that was Little Bird. So that was my first book. Yeah.
Wow. So 6 years. So kind of like, you know what? I'm making films. It's not doing what I want to do, fulfilling things. And you kind of were working on a script for what was in turn Little Bird. And there was something about like, what was it? Where was it at that point where you figured Little Bird would work in the medium of comics maybe better, or in just a different way than film, and you decided to go shift it towards a comic?
Almost right away. I mean, it was sort of, and just to be clear, I wasn't tired of making films. I was tired of directing commercials.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because that was my job, right?
Yep.
And, but the thing is, even as a filmmaker outside of commercials, you're so limited to what you can do.
Right.
And I would say that, like, if anyone's seen short films I've made, or if you spoke to anyone that I've worked with, like my producer at the time or something like that, they would tell you that like my ideas were so much bigger than what we could get away with,
Yeah.
And as soon as I because comics was just like the thing I loved. Like I never thought, it's like, well, you can't make those. Those are just like these magical things that appear and bring joy into my life.
Right.
But then it just clicked for me, and I was like, oh, and then I can do like everything the way I want to do it. And there's no budgetary restrictions in terms of what you're seeing visually. And then that was just, then I couldn't see it any other way.
Nice. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk Little Bird then, since we're getting to the comic aspect. Where did this idea originate for you of Little Bird? Like, how did it come about?
It was kind of a stew of things, and I think the book reads like that too. But no, it was so many things. It's hard to even unravel it, to be honest. But on top of doing commercial work and on top of doing short films, I was also doing documentary work, and I was working with had been for years working with some local First Nations communities. And in particular, doing like a series of interviews with residential school survivors and that type of thing, elders talking about what they went through. Mm-hmm. And also, like, I kind of have a long history of activism in my family. My grandparents, my mom, protesting, cutting down old growth forests and stuff like that. And a lot of what I witnessed in the conversations that I had, and, from talking about these things with my mom and stuff like that, it was quite often Indigenous people on the front lines of those things, so whether, all those environmental things.
Right.
So when it came time to sort of create this, put this story down with like this, rebellion against a theocratic American empire that's trying to overtake Canada, and quite not only Indigenous, but like quite often Indigenous women, and I was like, that's what it is, in my mind, you know. And then I also just hadn't seen like science fiction that had like indigenous characters at the forefront of it. That was just something, and this is 2013,
Right.
you know, that's 10 years ago I started working on it. So yeah, it's that. And then obviously, you know, it's like just injected my own sort of, you know, political thoughts into it. And yeah, just, and just getting weird with it and having fun, a lot of it. Yeah.
That's so cool. So real quick, if someone's for whatever reason is watching this interview and hasn't heard of Little Bird, what are you doing? But what would your elevator pitch kind of for that story be?
It's the main character is a young girl fighting in a resistance against a theocratic American empire in the very distant future. And her mother is the leader of that rebellion. And she's kind of like a child soldier that's just been brought into it. It was never, she's like the ultimate weapon kind of thing. But it was never a choice that she got to make. So as this war unravels, so does the layers behind her family history and how this all ended up like this. That's about the best I could do.
That works perfectly for me. So
okay, yeah.
So you said this was a 6-year process. What point did you get connected with Image of getting it? You know, how far along down the road were you of making this book before, you know, going to Image? Was it early on or later on in the process, or?
No, it was much later on. I was just making it. So I found everybody, I put the team together. I hadn't even really thought about the publishing side of it too much at that point. I was just, every time I did a gig, I would pay the people involved and we would just get more pages done. But obviously finding Ian Bertram and who's, you know, one of my best friends at this point, he's like a brother to me, but you know, making that connection, having him come on board, and then Matt Hollingsworth as colorist, and Aditya, and that sort of, it gave it like a whole new, you know, life. And that, you know, who knows what would happen if those things didn't come together. But to answer your question, by the time we pitched it to Image, we had like the entire first issue complete, and we were well into the second one. And so, you know, this thing just kind of ended up in Eric's inbox and it went from there.
Yeah. Well, they obviously saw something and said, this is good, because like everyone else, I said, it won an Eisner, 2020 for Best Limited Series?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, not a bad way to start your comic career, I don't think.
Not too bad. It's all downhill now for sure.
Like, I mean, I just feel like as a new creator, like it had to have been so cool, like to get the nomination, you know, like, oh, this is neat. But then you bring home the whole kit and caboodle. You got it. You got the win. How was that experience?
It was wild. I mean, the Eisners were canceled that year.
Yeah.
Which I, if I'm being totally honest, I feel like it's kind of a blessing, because that means I didn't have to go. Because I'm not great with crowds,
yeah,
stuff like that. But when I found, I like to spend a lot of time camping, and I found out while I was camping with my family, and I was just like, wow, that is crazy, you know. So it obviously feels awards are, you know, who knows what to think of them, but as a sign of just sort of of like appreciation from peers, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I feel like there's, you know, like you said, awards are awards, but there is something about, you know, like, hey, something that you created, people, there was a resonation, you know, people like, I really like this, they gravitated towards it. And so how has that been for you then, of trying to say, like, because I know you worked on what Critical Role was, that was afterwards, and and then working on getting ready for Lotus Land. How is that process for you of figuring out what you want to do now after Little Bird?
Yeah, it was quite a shift. And I was talking to my wife the other day, and I was like, the last 3 years feels like 12, you know, like it's crazy. But I was not prepared to do more, you know, and I had all these opportunities, and I had to just sort of, you know, start from scratch again, you know. Yeah, I don't know. What was the question?
No, it was just like, did it,
yeah.
you know, I guess my question was, did it change the process when it came to creating comics, you know, after, you know, what the Eisners did, you know, winning the Eisner.
Oh,
but
sure.
were you even planning on writing comics more? Or you're like, you just wanted to tell Little Bird, and then it was like, oh, well, I should make more.
No, I mean, definitely by the time I was in the process of making it, I knew that I was going to keep doing it.
Okay.
I fell in love with the process, and but I was starting from scratch. I didn't have things just sitting around, you know. So Critical Role approached me about doing a miniseries for them, and so I did that, and then I started, you know, well, at the same time as that, I was already working on Precious Metal, which is our follow-up to Little Bird. And that will be out next year. And
okay, good.
That when we've been working on that for 5 years, so that's been a lot of my time. You know, this is like a 500-page script that is, you know, being adapted into the. So it was. I've spent a lot of time on that, and as well as Lotus Land, and then there's 2 other things in the works. So, you know, and also like my mom was sick and she passed away, and I was her primary caretaker. And so there's like a lot has happened in the last, but you know, the short of the long of it is that like, starting next year, there'll be a more sort of regular output from the writer, I guess. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So let's shift a little bit to then Lotus Land, which is, at the time of recording, just came out. And the news also just dropped that it's already going back, Boom sending it back for a second printing. So it sounds like the initial response has been great. I read the first issue. I loved it. People haven't gotten to check out Lotus Land. What was Lotus Land? What's the story about?
The story is the story sort of on the outside will sound familiar, and intentionally. It's about a retired homicide detective who lives in seclusion with his son on an island off of the coast of British Columbia, which is where I live. And he gets called in to do one last case, and we're not really sure why. And it is almost impossible to talk about the story without spoiling it. So I have to sort of lean on the cliches of like, it's a sci-fi noir about a detective, and because if I talk about the real story, it gives itself away. But it's you know, at its heart, it's 2 things. It's a love letter to old noir films, which are like my favorite thing. And even though it's a futuristic sci-fi setting, it really is more of an homage to like old sort of Hollywood films that I love. And it's a very intimate story about a father and a son and their relationship. Yeah.
Since you brought it up, I'm going to ask it, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you have a couple favorite noir films that you really like, that like you're like, man, these are my go-tos?
Yeah, I mean, something more like, you know, recent, not by recent I mean not 30s and 40s,
not in the black and white.
Yeah, is like Chinatown. Like that's a movie I've watched, you know, 1,000 times. But then there's also like all the, you know, the classics, you know, like Detour and the early Hitchcock stuff, and you know, Kubrick's Killers, and which is his first feature, and there's a bunch of them. If anyone has the Criterion channel, you can just like binge this stuff. It's amazing.
So good. Yeah. So good. So that kind of helped shape it a little bit of where you wanted to go. Is this when you're writing a story? So like even Lil Bird, you know, and now this one with Lotus Land, do you have kind of an idea of, hey, I want to tell it in this like 5-issue arc, and then if there's more to explore, I can? Or how do you process deciding how long of a story you want to tell? Because I know comics is a little different format than like writing a short film or even a long form film where it's like you have to set, you have to end. Where in comics it can be like you might get to tell more if you want.
Right.
So how do you
Yeah,
balance?
I very much plan things to be a certain way, and I don't really veer off that.
Okay.
But I also, the way I write is, I write a lot of material, or I have a lot of ideas that are off the page, so that opens up the world to be explored further, even if that's not the story that I'm telling in that moment, kind of thing. Yeah. So I would say, and that happened with Little Bird, where halfway through it, I was like, oh man, I got to come back to this character, because by the time I wrote he's only in 2 scenes in the whole book, kind of thing. But it's like, yeah. I wrote his whole story while I was working on Little Bird, like just in the background, and I'm talking about Max Weaver from Little Bird, or Sarge, and he's the protagonist in Precious Mill. But same with Lotus Land. It's like I'm really telling this story about this father and this son.
Yeah,
and it's a very specific story. But in that process, we're creating this world that is so much bigger outside of that. And he's a cool character. So like, could we come back to that and tell that? Yeah,
right.
Could. Yeah.
Do you, as a writer, as a creator, do you have kind of a file full of ideas that like when you write, or are you just kind of like, if it's good enough, it'll stay there and I'll come back to it? How's that process of trying to figure out ideas and figuring out if they're going to work for making it into a story?
More the latter. Like, I will jot things down once in a while, but I'll just lose them. And like, I write down lots of things and then I have no idea where they go, So it's more like, I just kind of jog, I think about ideas, and it's the one that I can't get rid of that becomes the next thing that I become obsessed about. I'm also a big, like, believer that, ideas are cheap. Like, I don't really, like, the idea itself is not the most important thing. So, I think it's what you do with it and how you explore it that is what makes a story unique and interesting. Like, if someone put a gun to my head and said, you've got, a holder for your pencils and an iPhone, make a story or die. Like, I could write a story about that, and it would be interesting,
Right.
And it's like, that's not an interesting idea, So, that's. But of course, I want to explore good ideas. I'm not saying don't, but
you're not saying Lotus Land came from a iPhone and a pencil, or is what you're saying?
No, definitely not. No.
Do you is this a 5-issue series, or is it sold as ongoing? Like, what's the length?
It's a 6-issue series. Okay. Yeah, everybody asks that question. I guess it's not really advertised.
It's hard. Much, well, because sometimes they put it and solicits, but even sometimes it's like, even if it's like 1 of 6, it's with the idea of, well, we'll probably come back and visit it again or something.
Yeah, you never know.
So how did this creative team come about? Because I know you said with Ian, like you kind of put the team together for Little Bird first. Was that the same case with this, or was it kind of more once, working with Boom to help put the team together?
Oh no, Boom was, well, in my case, Boom was very involved in putting the team together. We initially had a different artist who, for personal reasons, wasn't able to continue on the project. And then I found Kaio just like online. I don't know. I was just like, just scrolling through maybe Instagram or Twitter or something. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And And I'm so happy it worked out that way because
Yeah.
he's incredible. You know, he hasn't done that much, you know, but like he suits the book. Like I can't really imagine it without him. Like,
Yeah. So,
great.
Boom had a lot of hand on it, but then Kyle, you kind of found once the original fell through. How long has this idea been with you of Lotus Land? Because I know you said you were working on Little Bird for like 6 years. Obviously, I feel like this is probably a shorter process, but does it take a while for you to say, like, I might have something before you like start to really flesh it out?
Yeah, it does. Actually, Lotus Land is like an old idea for a story. Like, again, yeah, like 10 years back kind of thing.
Okay.
And it's changed a lot since then, but it is one of those ones that I kept returning to, you know, like I talked about earlier. And it was really like, I also just wanted to do something in that genre that I really loved, you know, like that's, you know, and so I kept returning to it. I wanted to do something in Vancouver, where I live. And no,
That's cool.
it's been around for a long time.
That's cool. Well, Darcy, I want to respect your time. This has been so much fun getting to talk about how your process is as a creator and then all the works that you're working on. And I was going to ask, you know, if we're going to get to see Precious Metal, because I know it's been another long process of working on it for a while, but it's coming out next year, you say?
It's coming out next year. Crazy excited.
That's so good.
It's huge. It's like every issue is epic. It's an event. Yeah, it's going to be super fun.
I can't wait. Again, I'm loving Lotus Land. Little Bird was great. If you're haven't read Little Bird,
yeah, I know.
You know, just throw it all together. There you go. That's another idea. Lotus Bird.
That's my next one. My bird.
And then Little Land. We'll put those all together. No, but go read Little Bird if you're watching this interview and you haven't, or listened to it and you haven't gotten to read it yet. But definitely go check out Lotus Land. Again, it's a second printing, so you know you still should be able to get copies of it to get this book. And Darcy, is there anything that we haven't gotten to touch on yet that you want to highlight still of stuff that you've worked on, or that you can talk about that you're working on, or you're like, no, this is it. We covered all our bases.
Oh no, there's a bunch of interesting things coming up. But it all starts with Lotus Land and goes from there. I just say, like, Lotus Land is a mystery, so you need to get to the end. And every issue is more interesting than the last. And I feel like comics are not always engineered that way. You know, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on like number one to just be like blow the doors off. And then a lot of times readers feel disappointed because it kind of, you know, drifts from there. It's like every project has a certain amount of energy. And if you put all the energy in the first, you front load it too heavy. This is, I can honestly say, a series where every issue you get in deeper and it becomes more interesting. So I'm just hoping everyone gives it a try and gives it a chance and comes along.
So you're saying if you read issue 1 and you're like, I dig this, you're like, well, good, because it's only going to just keep getting better.
Oh, yeah, 100% for sure.
Nice. Well, where can people follow along with you and stay up to date with what you're working on when you have the new series and things that you can talk about? Where can people follow along with you and what you're doing?
I have a newsletter on Substack, which I'm going to be a little better at moving forward, and primarily I'm just Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, which is DVP Direct.
Perfect.
My handle. Yeah.
So. Gang, I'll have the links to the Substack as well as Instagram on there. Go check out Lotus Land. I think you're going to really dig it. Darcy, thank you again so much for just taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk about comics with me.
Thanks for inviting me, man. Thanks for doing this. And all your interviews, I've been watching them and enjoying them. So
awesome.
I appreciate everybody who sort of like puts these things back into the community like that.
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
It's a huge part of it.
Good. So I'm just glad that you all as creators take to say like, yeah, I'll give this guy some time to just talk about comics, because that's what I love. I love this kind of interaction and seeing just kind of the behind the scenes of and the process of the whole shebang. So I appreciate you taking some time as well.
Thanks, man.
So, go check out some more books from Darcy. And with that being said, hope you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.